So welcome again to those joining on Zoom and for everyone watching again on the recording. This event is part of a series of events on community action for wellbeing that's being run by the Network of Wellbeing and Eden Project communities. I'm Flo Shalom from the Network of Wellbeing. We've got a whole team supporting the event this evening. We've got Tracy and Yana from Eden, and maybe you guys can give a wave just in case we couldn't see. And we've got Roger and Josh from the Network of Wellbeing, who can also maybe give a wave. And then we've got three speakers, Peter, Amria and Chris, who I'll introduce fully in a moment. But now that we're all kind of set up in this virtual space, I'd like to just invite us to take just a minute or two to just pause together actually, just to have a moment of mindfulness and be conscious of why we've kind of come together this evening and set our intention. So this will just be very brief, so if you love this kind of thing, enjoy it, and if you aren't that comfortable with it, don't worry, it'll be over quickly. So just inviting you to get into a comfortable position, maybe just checking in, rolling your shoulders a little bit and just making sure you're sitting comfortably. And if you would like to, you could close your eyes, or if you prefer, you can just kind of lower your gaze away from the screen just for a moment or two. And just inviting you to take a few deep breaths. Just taking this opportunity just briefly to slow down, just breathing deeply in, feeling the air in your body and then releasing it out. And then just checking in with yourself, noticing how you're doing in your body, how you're feeling, what your thoughts may be doing. Maybe you've got things that are still kind of racing through your mind from the day, but just inviting you to kind of give yourself permission to be present in this moment, in this event, knowing that you've come here to connect, to learn, to share, to engage with other people that care about the similar topics as you. That we've all come together actually this evening to explore building resilient communities. And there's a real power in that togetherness actually. So just knowing that there's kind of friendly, like-minded people on the other end of the screen that are also kind of curious, maybe a bit unsure, maybe really excited. But just knowing that you're not alone in this moment. And then with a few final deep breaths, I'll invite you to come back to the screen, whether you open your eyes, if your eyes have been closed. And thank you very much for taking a moment just to slow down in that way. It's always helpful to be grounded. So again, welcome, and I'm going to, in a moment, hand over to our speakers for the evening. But first of all, we would really love to check in with you guys about the topic. So I'm actually going to launch a poll with a few questions around the topic of the event this evening. So the topic is resilient communities, caring for ourselves and caring for each other. And the poll is asking, it's a statement, my community is a source of resilience for me. Do you agree strongly? Are you unsure? Do you disagree? Or do you strongly disagree? And then the second question is, when was the last time you had a conversation about resilience? Was it today, yesterday, within the last week or month or year, or perhaps it's never? So just giving you a few seconds to respond to those questions before I end that poll and then share the results with you, just so that we can get to know each other a little bit more as we start this event this evening together. Great, so I'm going to share the results with you. Hopefully you can see those on your screen now. So in terms of whether community is a source of resilience for you, 47% of people agree with that, and 18% strongly agree. So well over half are on the agree side, but then there's 16% disagreeing, 3% strongly disagreeing, and about 16 in the middle. Really interesting. Thank you for sharing, guys. And the last time you had a conversation about resilience, 32% within the last week. Really interesting. Yeah, so definitely a real range, but that's the most prominent one within the last week. So we're going to have a chance to have more conversations about resilience tonight. So if you were one of the people that said never, then tonight's going to be your night. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And that's just giving a snapshot of people's engagement in this topic. But like I say, we'll go deeper into it. I see Harry's asking, how are you defining community, physical or virtual? Really good question that we will likely touch on in the presentations and can come back to in the Q&A. Just a very practical thing before I introduce the first speaker, we would love you to ask questions throughout this event. My colleague Roger will be keeping an eye on the chat box specifically. So if you've got a question you'd like us to put to the speakers, it would be really helpful because the chat box tends to be really busy. If you just write question, maybe in capital letters, just so that we know that that's a question coming in. But without further ado, I'd love us to kind of get into the topic of the evening, and I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Peter Lefort. So Peter works in social change, including roles with Cornwall Council's Climate Emergency Programme and with the International Transition Network. He's been delivering workshops on personal and group resilience for 10 years to all sorts of individuals and organisations, and is a member of the Eden Project Communities Network, through which he supports and is supported by community activists from all over the UK. So really looking forward to hearing from Peter this evening as our first speaker. I'll hand over to you, Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Flo, and thanks everyone. Real honour to be here. If you could make me a co-host so I can share my screen. Yeah, it's really lovely to be able to talk to you all and talk to you about this and share the time with Chris and Amria as well. So I'm just going to share my screen. Got a few slides I just want to talk to you about, and so I've got sort of 7 to 10 minutes, and obviously it's a huge topic, so I'm going to be fairly brief, and what I'm going to talk about is the idea of prioritizing resilience. So you know, resilience is obviously there's a lot in that term, and it might mean different things to different people, but the fact that you've all come to this session or are watching the recording suggests that that term resonates with you. But it's one thing to understand resilience and the importance of it, and it's another thing to be able to prioritize it in our daily and busy lives. First thing I want to talk about is just a bit about change itself that feels really important when we're talking about resilience. So I'm not going to go into a big kind of definition of resilience, but I mean, here's a kind of very simple process of change. Of there's somewhere where we are and there's somewhere we want to get to, and we can move there, but there might be shocks along the way. So this lightning bolt it represents a shock, and those shocks can send us back to where we are, or in worst case scenarios, they can actually send us further away. We can end up worse off than we were when we started in trying to change. And building resilience is one way around it. If we can build resilience, if we can be responsive to these shocks, then that will help us get to where we want to be. But it's really important, I think, to acknowledge that is not the only part of the challenge. The other part of it is to change the way that change happens. One of the reasons that I think, you know, we often struggle with resilience is the way our society works, and the things that we're told are important and the things that we're told are not important. And obviously that's a harder thing to change. That's not something we can do on our own. It's something that takes collective work, whether that's campaigning or lobbying or the work of organizations at a local or national or international scale. So I'm not saying that we all have to be able to do that, but it's just important to remember when we're thinking about our personal resilience, that isn't always enough. And that's not a negative, that's just to take the pressure off a bit and think, if we think about resilience and we prioritize it a lot, that doesn't always mean we're going to be well, we're going to feel how we want to feel. And it just relieving that pressure a little bit, I think, is really, really important, because we're not doing this in a vacuum. The whole world is happening around us, and there's a lot in there that doesn't support resilience. So I want to talk about one specific tool that I use that I find really, really helpful. That's a good way of talking about how we prioritize resilience. So this is a resilience tree, and this is an exercise I really like to do. You don't need anything fancy. You just need a bit of paper and draw the very basic elements of a tree. We've got here the fruits at the top, and the fruits are the things that resilience gives you. And then we've got the roots at the bottom, and the roots are the things that give you resilience. So I invite you, if you've got a piece of paper, to jot some ideas down, or even put them in the chat box if you'd like to. But I'm going to run through this quite quickly, just with some examples of how you might approach a tool like this, and then after that, why it can be useful. So here are some examples of types of roots. So these are things that people have brought up in workshops I've run before, and it's a really nice mix of ideas there. And important to note in the bottom right, failure as well, because they don't always have to be positive. You can get resilience from a lot of different things. And once you've jotted down a few ideas here of what are the things that give you resilience, that make you resilient, then looking at the answers you've got, you might be able to put them into two categories. And I put them into two different colors here. So the orange ones here are things that you could just go out and do. Things you could do tomorrow or today or whatever, things that you can go and do. You can go and take a bath, you can keep a journal, you can meditate, you can spend time with your pets. Obviously there are contexts and sometimes you might not be able to do one of those things, but generally those are things you can take action on. Whereas the green ones are more kind of abstract concepts that we know are important, but are quite hard to know how to do. You might think, yeah, peace is really important for me. And maybe it's obvious for you what gives you peace, but maybe it's not. And it's really useful just to distinguish in your head or on your piece of paper the difference between those two ideas, because we need a balance. We need the things that we can do, but also we need these bigger concepts that are all connected. It might be that you get one from the other or vice versa, but it's really useful to think about the different types of roots. And then once we've done that, thinking about the fruits. So again, here are some examples of fruits, and this can sometimes be a harder thing to do. We don't tend to get asked this question very often of why is resilience important? What does it actually give us? So these are some examples. And again, once you've jotted some down, you can then split them into categories again. So two different groups. So some of these, the orange ones, are things that it's really probably quite clear what those mean to you. Okay, if I get more sleep, I know what that's going to mean. I know how it's going to impact me. If my mental and physical health are better, I know how that's going to impact me. But then the green ones, again, are a little bit more abstract. So happiness, happiness is obviously really good, but what does that actually mean to you? What will being happier actually mean in terms of what you can do, what you're able to do, who you're able to be? And this is the principle of this task. It's to look at, okay, how can you make connections between the things that you need to do in order to be resilient, and then the things that will happen as a result? Because we're so conditioned to be in these kind of feedback loops, through social media, through all of the other things of, if we do something, we want an immediate response to that, to know that it's had an impact. But unfortunately, resilience doesn't really work like that. We don't get immediate feedback from these ideas. So we have to build that ourselves. We have to start recognizing those patterns of, okay, if I do these things at the bottom, it's going to get to the things at the top. And that takes time. It's one thing to know it consciously, but to really believe it in your bones takes a bit more time. And it's also really important to really understand, how are these things important to me? How much can I prioritize these things? Looking at self-confidence, for example, I might think that's important to me, but until I actually really understand what that means, how that's going to impact me, I'm not really going to be able to prioritize it, because it's just this abstract concept. And the same as resilience. Often we think resilience is an important thing, but until we can understand what that means for us, it's really hard to prioritize it over responding to that email or doing something else where there's an immediate feedback that doesn't actually keep you well. So these things interrelate. This is a cycle. You can see that there's a couple of duplicates. There's creativity in both, there's peace in both, and these can really cycle and build really positive cycles, and it can also obviously go the other way. So I really recommend that as an exercise to do. And then two things just to kind of build on that and help kind of establish those things, because this really takes practice, I think, are one is about allies. So I think allies are really important. And I use the analogy of the lighthouse, which Eden Project communities use a lot. And it's the lighthouses are the people that kind of give you, that shine out light. And they're often people who don't get that feedback, who don't know the impact that they have on other people. And it can be a similar thing for resilience. There can be people who give us resilience, or people who support our resilience. And it's really important that we shine that light back on them. We let them know how important that is to us, because it's a really lovely thing to do, and receiving gratitude is a lovely experience. But B, it also normalizes that behavior in other people. If someone knows that going for a walk is really important to you, and you tell them how useful it is that they support you in that, and they back you up in that, then they're more likely to do it, and they recognize it, and they feel they've got permission to reach out. And knowing and recognizing and acknowledging your allies in personal resilience and in group resilience is a really important part of that process. And it's actually a really lovely part, because telling people how much you appreciate how they support you is really nice. And if you don't have allies, then you can build them, and making a connection like that, again, is a really lovely thing to do. And the last thing I wanted to say is about power, which is sometimes a really complicated and difficult thing to talk about, especially within resilience.
Just to let you know, on that point, you've got 1 minute left.
Yeah, no problem, nearly done. And power can be complicated, but resilience is about power, and it's about recognizing that we have power. And I wanted to share this quote from Martin Luther King Jr., which I think is wonderful, and I am going to read it out, so indulge me in that. Power properly understood is nothing but the ability to achieve purpose. It is the strength required to bring about social, political, and economic change. And one of the great problems of history is that the concepts of love and power have usually been contrasted as opposites, polar opposites, so that love is identified with a resignation of power, and power with the denial of love. Now, we've got to get this thing right. What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. And love and power are a huge part of building that resilience. So that's enough from me, and I will hand back to Flo.
Wow, what a powerful quote to finish on. Thank you, Peter. And thank you so much for all those very practical resilience tools that can be, I saw that people reflecting on in the chat in terms of their own fruits and roots. So really, really useful. So just a reminder, if you have questions for Peter, you can type in the chat, and it's really helpful if you write the word question first so that Roger can pick those out and pose them to the speakers later. But now I'm going to hand over to our second speaker of this evening, Amria Khatun, who has worked on social justice and women's rights within the voluntary sector and local government, the civil service, and in a personal capacity. Amria is currently helping establish a community healing and art therapy organisation called Deep Root Arts. She's a poet, performer, aunt and cat lover on a mission to make the world fairer and kinder. So really excited, and such a lovely, you really get a feeling of her personality and her community cheerleading coming through in that introduction. So I'll hand over to you, Amria. You're muted, Amria, sorry. And just a little reminder for Jana to share Amria's presentation in a moment.
Thank you very much, Flo, and thank you, Peter. So much content there to think about and reflect. I'm really excited to be with you all today, and I'll be talking about this much more in a personal capacity and how I've been surviving the pandemic with my community. And I know one of the questions earlier was, is it a virtual community or is it a physical community? And I'm actually a very face-to-face type of person. So that's one of the things that I've struggled with, is actually my community's become much more virtual. And so I will talk a little bit about maintaining connectivity in that space as well. I'm happy to take questions. I'm actually using my phone, so I can't do both at the same time. But if someone tells me there's a question there, I'm happy to take that. And as Tracy alluded to earlier, just before we all joined, I can talk quite a bit and quite quickly. So if anyone does struggle to understand me and my Yorkshire accent, please just ask me to slow down. It's fine. It's just because I get excited. Okay, great. Thank you, Jana. Next slide, please. So I'm just setting the scene here. My life in March was all doom and gloom. As we know, there was the daily briefings, the heightened awareness. I also, for the job role that I have, I do work for the civil service, suddenly found myself in a role, and it was sudden, where every single minute of my day was spent thinking about COVID-related things. Personally, also, I was what you'd call non-shielded vulnerable. So I have vulnerabilities that meant that really I should take as many precautions as I can. But then I also had family members who were shielded vulnerable. So, you know, literally I was struggling with my concerns and anxieties around the mortality of people that I loved and cared about, like pretty much everyone in the country and the world at the time. You know, it was just really heightened awareness. And then something else I discovered is that actually panic spreads faster than COVID. So my brother, I was doing quite well, and then he just kept going on about shopping and shopping and shopping and shopping. And all I heard from him every time we spoke is, have you done your shopping? Eventually I gave in and went shopping because he asked so much. I came home with 3 bottles of bleach and 3 bunches of flowers. So I clearly don't do panic shopping very well either. So next slide, please, Jana. Thank you. Yep, I've just quickly highlighted there were plenty of woes and wobbles along the way. I mentioned I was under extreme stress from all aspects of my life. It felt like there was nowhere that felt safe and comfortable. There was a lot of anxiety, insecurity, because like I said, I've just joined. Working in a virtual environment on something so stressful is really, really interesting, because you were literally thrown into teams you've never worked with before. And just to put it into context, I'm a policy person. Suddenly I was working in a data and analytics team. So, you know, in terms of the grey matter being exercised and really, really tried, that was huge. Relationships were challenging. I mean, my husband and I, at one point, I was ready to divorce him and his entire family. Actually, that had more to do with me and how I was reacting to things rather than what they were doing. And it is just me and my husband and the cat that live here. And one thing that I really did find is I just could not switch off, because I'm a worrier, and I was worrying about everyone, and I was worrying about my community, and I was worrying about myself and my family, you know, everyone. I have family, you know, abroad. I have family in different countries and in different places, and I was worrying about everyone. And then unfortunately, tragedy did strike. One person in our family did contract COVID and die from it. And that journey was basically 3 days from us knowing that he had contracted it to him passing away, which was such a shock. I mean, any death obviously has been a tragedy in this, but it was such a shock to us. And therefore, as a family, we began to feel quite bruised in that, you know, we had 100% death rate in the family. So the one person who had it died from it. So it became quite a bit of a stress for us. However, despite that, part of dealing with our wobbles was comedy. So I became a little bit of comedic relief for my family. My deciding to paint my shed door a bright blue because I wanted something bright to look at. The shenanigans that I got up to with my cat and food and things like this. And I'm a sharer, so I'm really comfortable sharing these things. But it was one of our coping mechanisms, was to try and see the brightness in these dark times. Next slide, please. Okay, but despite all that, there was actually a lot of help available and hope. And that wasn't coming from external sources, actually. That was me having enough, just going one day, come on, woman, you're a hot mess, get yourself together. You know, you've got things to do, you're in a responsible position in your family, in your workplace, you know, you need to have some time out. Literally, I was putting myself on the naughty step and saying, sort yourself out. And some of the things that helped me there were actually really connecting again with what is my personal purpose. What is it that matters to me? What do I need to feel better? What do I need to feel comfortable. And for me, one of the biggest things was feeling like I'm making a difference, feeling like I'm helping, and actually being really grateful for the position I'm in. So despite all my moaning and groaning at the time, is recognizing that I am in a privileged position, and then what could I do around that? My next step then was to think about connecting with opportunities. So how could I help? Who could I help? And bear in mind I was shielding, going outside and physically helping people wasn't really an option for me. So I was thinking, well, what are the virtual opportunities? And I decided to volunteer as a befriender. Anyway, those of you who are out there and run volunteer projects will know that's not always as straightforward as that. And those opportunities didn't come through in a timely manner. So what I decided to do is not pursue it, because at the time I had some family members and a friend going through several difficult separations. And I kind of became the informal counsellor to quite a few people. And I thought, actually, I could befriend strangers or I could support the people in the family who need it. However, my point at 3 is I, in the end, found that wasn't enough. I mean, it was really important work, and there was one person I spoke to every single day because of the trauma she was going through, but I wanted to do something bigger than that. And one day I was speaking to my mother-in-law, who was sat in a village in Bangladesh, and she was really worried about the really destitute and poor people there, and how, because of the lockdown, they couldn't even come door to door to ask for grain or a little bit of support. And it just really got me thinking, what could I do about that? So I reached out to my close friends and my family, and I'm very fortunate to have an army of nieces and nephews, who quite a few of them are working now, and we were able to raise just under £4,000, which then meant we were able to provide food and resources for over 400 families throughout, leading up to the fasting period in Bangladesh, throughout the lockdown, and after as well. And that just absolutely made such a big difference to people. There was no pizzazz around it. There was no anything. It was just something we did very small, very intimately as a family to, impact on people halfway around the world. And that really, really helped me, because it made me reconnect with my power, as Peter mentioned earlier. And that was something just really, really powerful for me to do personally, but also for some of the nieces and nephews, it was the first time they'd done something like this as well, where they could see the direct impact of their hard-earned money. And they all give in charity in different ways, but this was like much more close to home. The next thing for me was connecting with your tribe, and your tribe can be anything. So for me, it's creatives, poets, it's people who are really interested in social justice and human rights, which is, most decent people. But then also some weird and wonderful people who just really, appreciate my slight odd way of looking at the world, and connecting and reaching out to them. And I did that via Facebook, I did that via Twitter. So this weekend I've put in connection a school with some inspirational speakers. This is all on Twitter. I'm helping somebody else try and source lights for a new shop in Bradford, don't ask. And then somebody else find some shoeboxes for art projects. All seem like random things, but they're like the connections that I'm able to see and make between the people that I connect with, which is really powerful. But also, because I reach out and I'm so comfortable, when people started to see my spark dulling, they reached out to me as well, and one person, God love her, came to my door and brought me some really nice notepads, some soothing booties, etc., to help me get back on track, because she saw that's something that I did for them. And then finally, one thing that I realized here in the help and hope world was I needed to stay kind to myself. So I was so busy being kind and worried about everybody else, I forgot that actually, it's okay for me to shut down for a little bit if I need to, given the, extreme situation I found myself both at work and at home all of a sudden. And then I've been connecting with the ability to say no. And that's been quite powerful as well. So next slide, please, Yana.
Just to let you know, Amria, you have 1 minute to go.
Oh my God. Okay. Are we going to share these slides with everyone?
Yeah, we can do. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, that's fine. So basically, this is just what I've said there about staying connected, contributing, making an effort. You know, this is the get dressed, you know, reach out to somebody. Tracy just popped up there and said I reached out to her because I kept thinking about how she says, hello, my darling, and I wanted to talk to her. And just little things like that. So next slide, please. So this week we had the loss of this absolute tiny woman, and I really relate to her, not because I've got any greatness like her, but she was also just about 5 foot tall, and so am I. So, I mean, the one thing that really stood out about this quote was, one lives not just for oneself, but for one's community. And I absolutely feel that, and that's what makes me feel stronger and resilient, and I always want to contribute in that sense. So please do read the whole quote. And the next slide, please. And I think the notorious RBG would be happy that I'm finishing with my own words, as she talked in her own, which is remember to breathe. I literally felt like at some points I was holding my breath. Laughter, the best tonic. I have absolutely had late night laughter sessions on WhatsApp with friends where we've cried with laughter, and that has really been so healing. Remember to love yourself and others, and remember you're brilliant. The poet inside me, the one I swallowed for breakfast, invites you to think about the analogy of a diamond to us as humans, and what that can tell us about the situation we're living through and the challenges, and how we can sparkle even in darkness. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amria. That was an incredible presentation, and so appreciated how much of your own personal story you shared. I saw in the chat that people were really appreciating that. Yeah, and lovely. If you, I know that we're in a virtual room, but if we want to, and I meant to say this after Peter's excellent presentation, we can maybe give a kind of virtual round of applause, either by giving flowers to Peter and Amria for the presentation so far, and or there's a reactions button at the bottom where you can give a bit of a round of applause or a thumbs up.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely. I'm still a relative Zoom novice because we always use Teams.
So well, there you go. Now you see, you've got reactions and flowers and thumbs up all around the place. So thank you so much. And I know that with both Peter and Amria, we could listen to them share for a lot longer, and we will have a chance to ask questions. So again, do put your questions in the chat box. But now I'm going to hand over to our third and final presenter for this evening, which is Chris Johnstone. So Chris has a background in medicine, psychology and coaching, and has been involved with resilience training for over 30 years. His books include 7 Ways to Build Resilience and a book he co-authored with Joanna Macy called Active Hope. And he runs resilience trainings online as well at collegeofwellbeing.com. And yeah, Chris is a really inspiring speaker, and I know him well, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to share this evening. So I'll hand over to you, Chris. Sorry, just to say that you're muted, and I'll also make you co-host so you can share fantastic.
So thank you, Flo. Thank you everyone for coming tonight, and we're having our conversation about resilience, and so really building on Peter and Amria, I'm going to share my screen, and what I've got here is just a I work a lot with the idea of stories and the idea of what would a story of resilience look like. And Amria's told us one. This is a story about Amria at March, you know, the time when coronavirus hit. That was the adversity faced. And often in stories of resilience, they have difficult beginnings, but then there's some kind of turning or some kind of recovery where there are things that help that lead to a better than expected outcome. And
sorry,
so,
Chris, just to briefly interrupt you, people are saying it's a little bit quiet on the chat, so I wonder if it's possible for you to turn up.
How's that? Testing 1 2 3.
Much better. And good. Just the second thing, the screen. It seems like you've shared a white screen rather than your presentation. I'm not sure if that's the same.
How's that? Is that better?
Is that? Yeah. Can everyone see? Everyone can see the presentation.
Good.
No, I can hear Chris, but I can only see a white screen.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to stop share.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to share screen. Oh, I see. Here we go. How about this? Okay.
Beautiful. Thank
Thank
you.
you. So we've had a really good example of a story of resilience. So this was a story about Chris speaking at a webinar, and the adversity
Very good.
faced was techno disaster. And anyone who runs webinars, it's one of the things that happens. It might seem bleak at the start. And what helps is, first of all, noticing the problem. And thank you for the people who kind of put their hand up and said things aren't right. You know, that sometimes we can be seen as somehow a disturbing influence if we name our experience of things not being right. But actually, that's a resilient strategy. We need to start from where we are, but then looking at what helps. And in this case, it was a story of people helping. Anyway, we got there. So here we are. And I work a lot with the idea of structures and frameworks that you can apply at lots of different levels. So I'm just going to jump here to just this idea of what I call the me, you, and us model of resilience, that you can look at that story of difficult beginnings, having turning points that lead to better endings at the level of ourselves. That's me, which is about self-help. You can also look at it when you're supporting someone else, helping someone else have some kind of turning point or shift. And what we're also here to look at today is the idea of resilience communities, building resilience together. And it's really looking at the story of resilience applied to us. And all three of those levels are interrelated, and each feeds and nourishes the other. And so if we can operate at all three levels, that's a more powerful way of supporting the story of resilience. And in terms of what helps, I suppose one of the things I use simple check-in. So when I'm working with groups and people, I ask people, I say, what zone are you in? So if resilience is about what helps us deal with challenge, sometimes we're in the easy zone. Sometimes we're orange or even in the red zone. Amria, sounded like you were in the red zone in March. Really that what the phrase is, the corona coaster. It's like a roller coaster, but linked to this crisis. And resilience practices and training really is about what helps us when we're in the orange or red zone. And what I'd like to do is share some of the things I find help. And one is this simple image of, I call it the spider diagram. And it's just recognizing that whatever you face, it can go different ways. That there are better ways it can go, worse ways it can go. And in the Penn Resilience Program, developed in the States at the University of Pennsylvania, they have a form of this where they ask three questions. They say, what's the best that can happen here? What's the worst that can happen here? And what's most likely? You can just do it with your hand. What's the best? Thumbs up. What's the worst? What's most likely? And then resilience is very much about how we make the best more likely, how we make the worst less likely. And so you can think of the double spider diagram is when we find ourselves on a difficult turning, what can we do here to create a better version of that? And you can apply that yourself in supporting others and also at the level of our community and society. And so if we kind of follow on this story, a question I ask is, what would a story of resilience look like here? Whether yourself, others, what would a story of resilience look like here? Someone who'd been on one of my courses had an emergency admission to hospital. And asking that question, she told me later, it changed her experience of the hospital admission, because she began to think, okay, what would a story of resilience look like here? What can I do to find a better version of this? And you can think of it, I work a lot with self-talk, how we speak to ourselves. And one of my phrases is, here's me facing this, whatever's going on. Okay, here's me facing this. People can't see my PowerPoint screen, and what helps is noticing, listening, looking at what I can do to change that. And so that's broadly how that story of resilience goes, but also in that down slope, up slope, that repeats many times each day. That's why it's more like a roller coaster. It goes up and down. We do get dips. Resilience is what helps us respond to them. Also, what helps us make them less likely to go so deep. And one of my favourite tools is just an image of a boat in a water level. And a boat in a water level is like life going well, and crashing into a rock is hitting a problem. And when we hit problems, we might go and see someone who knows about the rock. I trained as a medical doctor. People would come and see me when they were concerned about illness rocks. But resilience is more like the water level. When your water level's higher, you can float over rocks. And that applies to the virus. It's interesting that you can do things that strengthen your resistance to viruses, that make them less likely to happen. There was a psychologist, Sheldon Cohen, who did lots of research squirting measured amounts of cold and flu virus up people's nostrils, and then looking at what strengthened their ability to resist infection. And that with the same measured amount of virus, not everyone gets the same symptoms, but things that make a difference are things like the level of stress we have, the amount we're sleeping, the quality of our relationships, how we're eating, but also our level of background mood as well. And there's something here about the role of upward arrows. Oops, pardon me. The role, let me see. I seem to be, okay, this is what I need to do, is to go back. Just this image here, the upward arrows have a buffering effect. Upward arrows raise our water level. So a question I ask myself is, how's my water level? My water level is my background level of resilience. You can ask someone else that. How's your water level if you're helping someone else? But you can also look at the water level in a community, in a society. You can say, how's our, you can talk about it as social capital, the strength of relationships in a community. How do we become an upward arrow? And what I work with is this idea of a toolkit of strategies, strengths, resources, and insights. And those letters, I call it the self-help SSRI. Those letters SSRI are commonly associated with antidepressants, but actions we take and choices we make can also have an antidepressant effect. They can act like tools. And this is very much like Peter's idea of the roots, really. The roots, what are our different roots that support resilience? It's just a framework for looking at resilience factors. And I'm offering a free course at the moment called Resilience Tools for Free in a Time of Coronavirus Crisis. It's about an hour of video. This is just a 10-minute introduction to a framework. But what I'd leave you with is the question, how's my water level doing? What can I do that would be an upward arrow? What tools do I use? And the more we have conversations where we're sharing this together, the more we act like this idea of ripples extending outwards. We can all play a role in being upward arrows supporting resilience, not just at the level of me, not just at the level of you, but also at the level of us. I think that's probably my my 10 minutes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. That was really wonderful. And if I could just ask you to stop sharing your screen, then we can see each other. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And yeah, I see the reactions coming in of the flowers and the clapping hands. So yeah, thank you. A big round of applause and appreciation for Chris and what he's shared and offered there. So many practical tools that we can take away. A few people have been asking in the chat, will we be sharing the presentation slides? And I think, yeah, we will be in touch with Peter and Chris and Amria about having a version of their slides that we can share, because I think there's so much wisdom that has been shared this evening. We're also recording, of course, so you can come back and watch again if you would like to. I'm sure that you guys would like to hear more from Peter, Amria and Chris. I know I would love to also. So we're going to have a section of question and answers shortly. But before we do that, we wanted to give you guys an opportunity to connect with each other, actually. So I'm aware that you've been listening a lot to different kind of tools and perspectives and experiences around this core idea of caring for ourselves, caring for each other, and building resilience. And now, we're going to go into small breakout rooms. You'll be in a group of about 3 to 5 people, where you'll be able to introduce yourself, and then just have a bit of a reflection on what you've heard from the presenters, and just thinking, if you were to ask a question in the main group, what would you like that to be? And then I would also invite you to share, so I'm just copying in the chat these questions as well. How confident am I that I can play a role in community resilience? So we've talked quite a lot about your own personal resilience, and then we've touched on kind of the relevance of that to kind of building out to a more resilient community, as Chris was talking about just now. So those are the kind of 3 points that we invite you to share on in your breakout rooms: introducing yourself, reflecting on what you've heard, and asking, how confident am I that I can play a role in my own resilience and in community resilience? So I'm going to, you'll see a room, a pop-up box that will invite you to go into a room shortly. Just before we go into those rooms, I'd just like to mention a few short things, just in the practical. One is that in the breakout rooms, we won't be recording anything. So it's really nice, if you would like to turn on your camera and say hello and have a bit more of a social feeling. And none of that will be recorded. So if you still want to leave your camera off, that's totally fine. But just know that that won't be recorded, and it's nice to connect with people if possible. And also, if you have any issues in the breakout rooms, feel free. There's a little button where you can kind of call for help from the host. So feel free to let us know. And if you're feeling a bit like, actually, I prefer to kind of listen and reflect on my own, you can stay in the main room. You just don't need to accept the option to go into the breakout room. But those are just a few different options. So I will create those breakout rooms now, and hopefully you'll all be able to see that option, and we'll be back here in 10 or 15 minutes. Look to my colleague at the Network of Wellbeing, Roger, who's going to hopefully summarise some of the questions and pose them to our 3 speakers for this evening. So Roger, over to you.
I'm not muted now. So hello everybody. Thanks for your questions so far. At the moment we've just got 2, Flo, so hopefully if you've got questions, please put them in the chat box. The questions we've got at the moment, one from Harry, question to everybody, is how do we define community? Is it physical or virtual? And I guess I would also add into that, does it have to be your immediate neighbours, or can it be people throughout the area you live in? Maybe we could start with that one and see if anybody's got any thoughts on that.
Great, and Amria touched on that in her presentation. So maybe Amria, you want to come in first, and then we could go to Peter, then Chris.
For me, thank you. For me, community is people you connect with, and you've got some empathy. Now that can be your neighbour, and if you feel like a global citizen, then your neighbour is around the world. So for me, connecting to the people from my heritage in Bangladesh, so people I'd never met, was quite important to me, feeling like I was helping when they were really destitute. Physical community, like I said, is something important to me, but I also find the busier you get, and as I've gone through my 20 plus years of a career, I've met lots of wonderful people, and I find social media is such a good way to stay connected. You obviously have to have a really good policy, a personal policy around what you do, when, how, and you've got to have a healthy attitude to that and know when to step back. But for me, Facebook and the stories and adventures I share on there, which is actually called #ShortyVentures. It's kind of my tiny window into my bonkers life. It's the way I connect to people, but I also get advice and I give support, etc. So for me, community is absolutely, physical, but we're in a new world, and we have been for a while. It's not just COVID related. We're getting busier and busier, and it is difficult to stay physically in touch with everyone. There aren't enough hours in the day, unfortunately, but I find social media really fills a little bit of a gap for me.
Thanks, Amria. And just we can send round people, all the speakers' Twitter handles afterwards, because I know a few people want to catch up with your adventures on Twitter. Handing over to Peter.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think the community doesn't have to be physical or virtual, but the way we stay in touch with them is physical or virtual, and I think virtual is really important at the moment, but I think it's really important to remember the importance of kind of physical stimuli in keeping us well, and if our community is all online, that's fine, but we have to kind of still make physical connections, even if that's just going outside and feeling the ground and feeling a tree and just kind of having that physical connection that doesn't have to be people, which is obviously really difficult right now, but balancing those things and finding what you need from what you can get access to.
Great, thanks, Peter. And Chris, would you like to add anything, and we'll come to you next time?
Yes, well, just thinking about where do we use the word we and us, that when we feel a sense of belonging, feel part of something. And sometimes you can meet a complete stranger, and through a conversation you can discover sense of common ground or common purpose or something important to you both, and you feel connected and you feel a sense of usness. And that's one of the ways community grows. I feel it here, hearing people in the little groups that we had, and people expressing ideas and purposes and concerns that are important to me as well. And I'm also aware where I live. I mean, there's not many people around where I live. It's like a pretty remote part of the world or country anyway. And we have chickens and a couple of dogs and lots of fruit trees. And I feel like I'm in a community with them, a kind of biological community. I kind of feel a sense of belonging when I go round our garden. Um, so I guess it's kind of yeah, I mean, as has been said, where do we feel connected? Where do we feel a sense of there's a bigger thing that we're part of, a bigger story that we're part of that we share with others?
Thanks, Chris, and lovely touching on the community that you can feel with nature actually in those comments, because the final event in this particular webinar series is going to be on nature connection and well-being. So we'll mention a bit about that at the end, but really nice that you've brought in those themes already. Handing back to Roger for the next question.
Yeah, a couple more that are worth just flooded in now. One is from Helen, which I think is really interesting. If you lack a tribe due to being on the treadmill of life, does that directly create a lack of resilience? And Susie asks, how do you deal with people who are very negative on social media about, for example, new community projects?
So I kind of two questions there around dealing with negativity on social media, and then the first was, can you just kind of summarize that again, Roger?
Yeah, it's about lack of tribe. If you feel you're not connected, you haven't found the people that you really need to connect with, does that lead to a lack of resilience, and what can you do about it?
Yeah, really interesting question. So we'll come to Chris first on that one.
I interviewed someone called Peter Shaw, who was kidnapped in Georgia, and he was held in this tiny underground room for months and months in total isolation. And I think he was a really good example of how you can find community even with no one physically there, because what he did was that he kind of trawled through his memories of all the people that had been important to him, and each day he chose a different person to imagine giving a speech to. So he'd remember all the times he'd been with them, and he would kind of basically kind of compose a talk to them. And in sensory and social isolation, one of the things that can happen is you can actually have hallucinations. And so he'd sometimes hear voices coming back to him. But I think that what he taught me was that there is community in our memory and also in our imagination that we can draw upon, even if there's no one physically there. and that we can build a sense of relationship with ourselves as well. Perhaps there's a lot of work about writing, expressive writing, where we can write to ourselves. And as a way, for example, if people are very lonely, that you can write letters even if you never send them, but the process of writing is a way that you can kind of imagine yourself in conversation with someone else. Anyway, that's just some starting point ideas. I don't know how other people
Yeah,
respond to that.
thank you, Chris. Peter and or Amria, would you like to come in on that one?
I will if I can, because I did mention tribe, and as somebody like the treadmill of life is just a real challenge, and I know I mentioned it in our group that when you spend all day and you can't escape the computer screen, because that's kind of how you're working now when you're sat in your living room or wherever, how do you connect to people and how do you get the energy to do that? And I was saying, actually, thankfully I have a lot of people in my tribe who are night owls like I am, so we can be having a full-blown conversation at 11 o'clock at night and none of us think it's unusual to be doing that. But I suppose how you find them is there's a little bit of exposing your vulnerability and being open, connecting with people. And one of the things I say, and I've been recently saying to a sister of mine, is if you need to clear space in your sort of relationships and things, think about the people who leave after you have a conversation and you actually feel lighter, or you feel more hopeful, or you just generally, your spirit is lifted in some way. And you feel like you've been heard and you've been seen. The interaction may be just minutes, it may be a text message, it might be sharing a meme or something on Facebook, but if you feel there's a connection, those are the people who slowly become your tribe, and then you give into that as well. And when I say give into that, expose yourself to it, nurture it, grow it. I had an old council colleague who said, Amria, I'd comment more on your Facebook things, but my Facebook is made up of all cyclists and they've all got really daft ideas about things. He was talking about politics. And I said, well, that's really interesting, because I really carefully curated my Facebook page because I want a bubble. It's my escape. I want nice people there. I don't want to constantly fend off, awkward, negative things. And it's really interesting is over the last couple of years, I've had more, I won't say strangers, but people who have come across in different aspects of my life. And they think they know who I am, so they start commenting a certain way until they spend a bit of time, and then they go, oh, that is absolutely who she is. And then that negativity sort of drops away, because then they realise she is literally what she says she is. But it is funny. So, and then the other thing I do, I have, would you believe, on Twitter, got into an argument with the American gun lobby once. Yeah, I know. I didn't think it was possible, but I do not go on Twitter at 1 o'clock in the morning anymore, because clearly the nutters are alive and awake then. So again, there's just something about being aware of, who you might attract, paying a little bit of attention to the kind of hashtags you use. Gun sense makes a lot of sense to me, but clearly, anyway, I learned my lesson quite early on with Twitter. So it's just, taking your time. And in this virtual world, I would say it's easier to find your tribe, actually, because, you can connect with more people in different ways. But there is a little bit of vulnerability in there, which is putting yourself out there and being open and stay connected.
Thanks so much, Amria, for talking to those questions, both around building tribe and the kind of the pros of doing it on social media and the kind of how to deal with the challenges that might arise too. And Peter, any thoughts to add on these topics?
Yeah, just quickly, I think the treadmill analogy is a really interesting one, because why do we go on the treadmill? We use to build up muscles, right? And if we're building up those kind of muscles, it's an analogy maybe for work or for something like that, then we have to acknowledge what muscles we're not building up elsewhere. And I think having a tribe, being resilient, is about building up different types of muscles. Often they're not physical, they're mental, but it's about practice. What are we putting time into? And I think it's really important to reflect on that. And then the thing about social media, and there was also a question before I saw about apathy, and I think negative comments and apathy are real challenges. But I think what helps me address those is it's not about combating these things. Tracy does some beautiful talking about loneliness and how we can't combat that because it's a legitimate response, and it's the same thing with apathy and kind of this fear that people get. It's a legitimate response for people. We can't combat it. We can't tell them not to express apathy or not to express negativity, but understand where that's coming from and recognize that it's not about us. We can't control that, but we can just be, I think, you know, the vulnerability that Amria mentioned is really spot on. And just be honest about, well, how that's affecting us, but it doesn't define who we are. And I think acknowledging that, stepping back, again, it's another muscle. It just takes practice.
Yeah, thanks so much, Peter. And just to say thank you for those valuable comments from the speakers, and also for all of you kind of coming together in spontaneous community and responding to each other in the chat. That's always really lovely to see and much appreciated. And we will save the chat box and send it around as a copy because I know people have been sharing useful links and that kind of thing. So we'll save that so we can send it in the follow-up email as well. But I'm going to hand back to Roger for one kind of final round of questions before we move to closing.
Okay. Funny enough, we haven't, because Peter just asked the one about apathy, we haven't actually got a question, so I'm going to throw in one of my own, which is, you know, the next 3 or 4 months could be quite difficult with COVID coming back. Obviously, for some people who follow the American politics, there's the whole question of what happens if Donald Trump gets re-elected, all that sort of stuff. I'm wondering, what would the speakers say, you know, top 1, 2, 3 things that people should do each day to really maintain their resilience?
Great question. Anyone want to come in first on that?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think what I mentioned about allies, gratitude is really important. Saying thank you to people and acknowledging the role they play. And things like laughter. In our breakout room, Jenny was talking about doing laughter yoga, and it's amazing. You know, laughter is one of those things. It sounds, we're often wrong about the things that are important to us, and I'm hugely guilty about this, and because of the message we get elsewhere. But actually, just really believing how important something like laughter is every day, and figuring out how you find that for yourself, and it's different for every person, but it's really important, and we tell ourselves that it isn't. And again, it's a muscle. We need to build up that belief.
Thanks so much, Peter. Definitely up for more laughter. And Amria, would you like to come in next?
Yeah, I have spent the last few months watching cartoons, and I feel like they're very grown-up cartoons. They're multi-level, so you can watch them at different things. And it's really funny because I think colour is what attracts me to them. So I've spent a lot of time in my garden, and it's a very higgledy-piggledy garden, but I've had lots of colour, and I think that's been really important to me and how I feel and my mood and lifting. And basically I'd say, you know, do 1, 2, 3 or a dozen things that make you feel lighter. I exercise, and I've shared when I say I exercise, when I realised I wasn't exercising, I found this really, I call him my happy chappy, and all he does is walk, but he's got this big grin on his face, so the whole time I'm walking with him, I'm smiling. So it's not just exercise, it's actually affecting my mood as well, because I just find this young lad, you know, such fun. I think Peter mentioned gratitude, just being recognizing that you can be both grateful for all your privilege and everything that you have, but also sometimes feel a bit miserable, and that's okay. You know, you're not an ungrateful wretch because you're feeling a little bit down. So I think there's something there about balance and perspective, you know, and try and, you know, it's okay, we all do it. We wallow sometimes, we feel a little bit down, you know, we all have low mood, but then what do we do as a pick-me-up? And then the other thing I would say is, I don't know if you guys have any in your life, but I have some dementors in my life. So the dementors are the opposite of your tribe in a way, and they are part of your tribe because it depends on what they're going through. But sometimes they do suck the lifeblood and energy out of you after an interaction. So clearly you're the friend, you love them, you care for them, and you want to support them, so you will carry on interacting. But actually then recognize that you might need a pick-me-up afterwards, or you might need to limit it depending on how you're feeling. So I think it comes down to balance. So seek the light, you know, don't be afraid of some of the darkness, and then work out how, you know, what the balance is and how you support each other through that.
Brilliant, thank you, Amria, and I love the Harry Potter reference slid in there. Handing over to Chris.
Thank you. There's a lot of interest in mindfulness, and I think one of my favourite words is kindfulness. And kindfulness, and thinking of the me, you, and us model of kindfulness. So, what is it like to be kind to myself? And there's something about when things go wrong, when here we go again, kind of sense of encountering another difficult period. What's a regenerative activity that nourishes me, that feeds me, that is kind to me? So that's kind of one level. Then it's kind of like saying, well, okay, people around me, people I'm in contact with, if I was to do kindfulness outwards, what would that look like? And one of the great things is that when you're kind to others, both sides benefit. It's not about somehow a choice between selfishness and altruism, but actually when you give, it's one of the ways to boost your own mood. And then it's kind of me, you, and then us. And if you were to give something to the bigger picture, particularly if you're concerned about the world, it's like saying, well, what do I contribute to? We can all contribute to the problems, and we probably do in different ways. I know that I do, but it's like, how do I shift the balance? How do I offer something that's like, that's my contribution for today, or my contribution for this week? And I just love that kindness for me, you, and us, and that's my kind of foundation.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Really powerful words to help draw us to a close this evening. So we've just got a few minutes left together, and it's been a really rich evening of sharing from the speakers, from you all in the chat box. So thank you so much for sharing and connecting with each other. So yeah, we've heard so much this evening from Peter on kind of the roots of resilience and the fruits that can come from that, and about kind of knowing your allies, and then from Amria on really the power of finding purpose, and also the power of vulnerability and being kind of open, brave enough to be open with each other, and then from Chris on kind of building our water level of resilience and how we can do that ourselves, but also how that's a kind of collective and thing that we can do in community as well. So yeah, really, really rich sharings. We will share the follow-up email with the slides and the chat box and links. But I just wanted to close with a few announcements of further ways that you can get involved, learn more, engage, connect. So firstly, if you want to kind of connect to Chris's course that he mentioned during his presentation, and a lot of the trainings that he does on resilience, that you can find them via collegeofwellbeing.com. And I know that was asked in the chat box earlier and the link was included, but maybe I can ask, yeah, Jana is way ahead of me, including the link already just there. Wonderful. Like I've mentioned, this event is part of a series of 3, and we'd love to invite you to join the next event in the series. So that's in 2 weeks' time, and it's about how nature can contribute to community well-being. And Jana is being a star and helpfully putting the sign-up link to that event in the chat box as well. So if you're not signed up to that, then please do. Again, all of these links will be included in the follow-up email, but we just wanted to flag up a few of these for you because it's going to be a packed, rich follow-up email. And also we're hosting a few, both the Network of Wellbeing and Eden Project communities are hosting different events to kind of help you have that sense of community and connection and sharing and listening to each other. So the Network of Wellbeing will be running a listening space together with another organisation called the Heart Movement next Tuesday evening, and we're going to be focusing on the theme of resilience to follow up from this webinar. And again, Jan has helpfully put the link in the chat. And then I know that Eden Project Community is also running a range of events that I'm going to hand over to Tracy to mention.
Yeah, so we normally do a community camp down at Eden, and obviously we can't do that. So we're taking it online. And this is a course that anybody who's got an idea, fancies getting involved in their community, maybe wants to find other like-minded people. It will be running for 5 weeks, and it's 3 hours a week plus a plenary. You'll get some amazing inspirational speakers on there. But best of all, there'll be lots of opportunity for you to connect with other people across the UK and talk to them about your ideas and vice versa. So we try and create a peer support network for people who are just trying to make a positive change where they live. And then that will join a wider network of people. So we're really excited about that. I'm going to try nobble Amria to come talk on it as well again. You can find the link there if anybody wants to join us. We'll send out some physical resources before and after, and you could get an award for it if you wanted to as well. So just trying to keep people connected and inspired as the clocks go back.
Yeah, so thank you, Tracy, for sharing that. And yeah, as you can see, there's lots of ways to stay connected and involved. And yeah, the Network of Wellbeing and Aided Project communities, we're really excited to come together and support this. I also wanted to just briefly mention that this event has also been part of the Leeds Festival of Kindness, Compassion and Wellbeing, which we mentioned more in the first webinar for those of you that were here last time. But for those that are interested in finding out more about that, I'm just going to include the link in the chat box, and there's a whole series of events that have happened that you can watch again on the Kinder Leeds website, and also some events still happening over the coming months, of which this is listed as a part of. So yeah, thanks to all those folks from Leeds joining us this evening as well. The final thing is we love to get the second and final thing is we love to get your feedback. So Jana's going to helpfully put a link to our survey in the chat box. And the final, just to kind of share your experience of the event tonight. And the final thing is we'd love to take a screenshot of everyone, just so that we can share on social media that we've had this connecting experience this evening. Lisa's an experienced webinar girl, ready with her wave. Love it. So if you are happy to be included, please wave or smile or do what you like to do. If you don't want to be included, feel free to turn your camera off, and I will take a few screenshots now. Thank you so much, guys. And yeah, please stay connected with us, Community for Wellbeing hashtag. I'll share some of the photos. And yeah, thanks so much. Look forward to seeing you all again, hopefully. And thanks to all of our speakers this evening as well.